Today, we're about to peel back the curtain on a quarter that's been hiding in plain sight for decades. Folks who've stashed rolls of Washington quarters might have scoffed at a 1972 release years ago, but collectors know better. Beneath that familiar profile lies a world of subtle details and unexpected value. Whether it's a slight doubling on Washington's profile or a misaligned strike that left part of the design dangling, this quarter has stories to tell. In this segment, we'll trace its journey from metal blank to prized collectible, uncover the quirks that make it rare, and reveal just how much it's changing hands for today. The story begins in the early 1970s, when the U.S. Mint was balancing demand for pocket change against rising silver prices. By 1965, silver was phased out of quarters, replaced by the copper-nickel clad that remains standard today. In 1972, the Mint at Philadelphia and Denver struck millions of these new clad pieces bearing John Flanagan's portrait of George Washington. What seems like a mundane production run hides the roots of rarity. Slight variations in die polishing, steel planchet composition, and handling between facilities created fertile ground for errors. Those tiny imperfections, unnoticed by daily users, now captivate seasoned collectors. Identifying a valuable 1972 quarter starts with the eye. The most sought-after variety is the doubled die obverse, where the inscription, "In God We Trust," and part of the date appear doubled under magnification. It doesn't jump out at first glance, but use a 10x loupe, and you'll catch a ghost image offset slightly to the right. Other telltale signs include die cracks near the rim, tiny raised lines that trace accidents in the die metal. Broad strikes, where the collar fails to restrain the planchet, produce thinner, wider coins with flat, spread-out rims. Off-center strikes can leave part of the design missing, revealing a blank metal arc on one side. Each of these quirks transforms a common circulation piece into an intriguing collectible. When it comes to price, most circulated 1972 quarters trade for face value, or a modest premium of 50 cents to a few dollars. But error examples demand far more attention. A typical doubled die obverse in mint state might fetch between $30 and $75, depending on clarity of the doubling and surface preservation. At the upper end, flawless specimens graded MS66 or MS67 by a leading grading service have sold for $500 or more at auction. One near-perfect off-center strike, about 8% off, realized over $1,200 in 2018. The auction record belongs to an ultra-high-grade 1972 D doubled die obverse, which achieved $3,600 in a heritage sale. Proof that condition and rarity combine powerfully. Beyond dollars and cents, this quarter carries fascinating lore. Early reports of the doubled die variety circulated in specialist newsletters in the late 1970s, when a few collectors noticed the anomaly and shared images. Word spread slowly before internet forums accelerated its fame. Stories emerged of change hunters flipping through rolls in laundromats, hoping to stumble upon a jackpot. One enthusiast traded dozens of pocket junk for a single error specimen in 1990, believing its rarity outweighed the cost. Today, you can still find examples in circulation if you're persistent, though the odds are long, perhaps one in every 10,000 struck. Condition matters more than age when valuing these pieces. A well-worn, shifting our focus to the 1966 quarter, you'll discover a coin that bridges a pivotal moment in U.S. monetary history. Struck at both Philadelphia and Denver mints, these pieces bear the hallmark of an economy wrestling with silver's rising cost. By 1965, the mint switched from 90% silver to a copper-nickel clad composition, and the 1966 release represents the first full year without silver. That transition led to unforeseen quirks, planchet inconsistencies, hurried production schedules, and occasional die errors that now intrigue seasoned collectors more than half a century later. The Philadelphia minted 1966 quarter is instantly recognizable by the P absence. Mint marks didn't appear on Philadelphia coins until 1980, while the Denver issues carry a small D beneath the wreath. More than just mint marks, these quarters hide subtle deviations. The most coveted variety is the doubled die obverse. Look closely at United States of America on the rim. Under magnification, you might spot a faint second impression shadowing the primary lettering. Combined with faint doubling across quarter dollar, this variant commands attention. Die cracks are also common, appearing as spiderweb-like lines across Washington's hair, or the reverse wreath, each crack telling a story of stress in the minting die. Circulated 1966 quarters with no notable error will rarely fetch more than face value, or a modest 50-cent premium. However, error specimens ignite enthusiasm. A clear doubled die obverse graded about uncirculated $50 can command anywhere from $20 to $40, while mint state examples, MS60 to MS63, often fetch between $75 and $150. Attention peaks for MS64 specimens, which have traded hands for up to $300. Among the most dramatic auction results, a perfectly centered doubled die obverse graded MS66 achieved a surprising $1,000 at a major sale in 2020, underscoring how condition multiplies rarity's impact. Beyond doubling, off-center strikes on 1966 quarters are prized for their visual drama. When the planchet slips past the collar by as little as 3%, the image shifts, leaving a crescent of blank metal that seems to play peekaboo with George Washington's profile. Off-centers of 5 to 10% can command $200 to $400 in high grades, but when misalignment exceeds 15%, values can skyrocket into the four-figure range, particularly for specimens graded MS65 or higher. One such bold error, misaligned by roughly 20%, sold for $1,500 in 2019, capturing collectors' imaginations and pocketbooks alike. A curious variant emerges if you flip the coin. Some 1966 quarters exhibit what's known as a clipped planchet error. These occur when a blank disc is improperly. The 1967 quarter holds a unique place in U.S. coin history, coming right in the middle of a transitional era for American coinage. After the Coinage Act of 1965, the U.S. Mint removed silver from dimes and quarters, replacing it with a copper-nickel-clad composition. By 1967, the country was still adjusting to the disappearance of silver coins from circulation, and the mint was working overtime to meet demand. More than 1.5 billion quarters were struck in 1967, making it one of the highest mintage years. But despite that enormous production number, the 1967 quarter has earned attention among collectors for its rare errors and unusual features that slipped past quality control. One of the standout errors from the 1967 quarter is the double die error. This happens when the coin's die, which impresses the design onto blank planchets, shifts slightly between impressions, resulting in a doubled image on certain design elements. On 1967 quarters, doubling is most commonly seen on the obverse, especially in the lettering of Liberty or In God We Trust. These doubled letters can range from subtle to dramatic, and the more noticeable the doubling, the more valuable the coin. A strong doubled die example in uncirculated condition can bring in $150 to $300, while especially bold examples graded MS65 or higher can fetch over $500 at auction. Another highly sought-after error from 1967 is the off-center strike. Similar to what we discussed with the 1979 quarter, these errors occur when the planchet isn't properly aligned in the press. Off-center strikes from 1967 can vary from slight misalignments to dramatic shifts, where nearly half the design is missing. A 10% off-center 1967 quarter might sell for $50 to $100, while coins that are 50% or more off-center, with the date still visible, can command $300 or more, depending on.
Sliding forward a decade and a half, the 1981 Washington quarter might look at first glance like the everyday change jingling in your pocket, but scratch beneath the surface, and you'll find a surprising number of subtle anomalies and coveted varieties that have quietly captured the attention of seasoned collectors. Whereas the mid-1960s issues were all about mastering new clad compositions, by 1981 the U.S. Mint was balancing production efficiency with the demands of a booming, coin-hungry public. What emerged that year was a coinage rife with die varieties, mint mark oddities, and striking errors that today can command prices rivaling the most dramatic 20th century rarities. The story begins with the dawn of the quarter's modern era. After decades of largely unchanged design, production volumes surged once Washington's profile became the standard in 1932. But by the late 1970s, rising metal costs and consumer demand for roll hunters and vending companies pushed the mint to refine its processes. In 1981, quarter output at Philadelphia and Denver topped 1.4 billion pieces each, figures so massive they make modern collectors' jaws drop. Yet within those numbers hid tiny pockets of irregularity: misaligned dies, doubled rims, unusual mint-mark punches, and the occasional off-center strike. For an advanced collector armed with a loupe and a price guide, 1981 meant treasure hunting among what most saw as perfectly ordinary circulation stock. One of the year's most sought-after oddities is the doubled die obverse, though it's far subtler than the textbook examples of the 1930s or 1950s. Instead of bold doubling, the 1981 doubled die reveals itself through a delicate doubling of the motto, E pluribus unum, the date numerals, and the finer strands of Washington's hair. Under magnification, you'll notice a ghost image shadow a hair's breadth from the main devices, most pronounced on the 1981 digits and along the rim at 7 o'clock. A Mint State 65 example of this variety can fetch between $300 and $600. But if you stumble onto an MS-67 graded piece, expect bids north of $1,200 as specialists vie for these stealthy errors. Not far behind in popularity are 1981 quarters exhibiting a doubled rim or rim bulge, where the collar die's upper and lower segments misaligned ever so slightly. This produces a crisp, narrow raised line running just inside or outside the normal rim, lending the quarter a two-tiered edge that feels almost architectural. In circulated grades, these can trade for $25 to $50 depending on where. In uncirculated grades, MS-63 specimens hover around $150, while exceptional MS-66 bulges have been known to fetch $500 or more at auction. Another variety turning heads is the petite versus bold mint mark classification. In 1981, the Philadelphia Mint reinstated its P mint mark for the quarter for the first time since 1964, but not before experimenting with different punches. The initial small P mint mark, tiny and recessed, appears set deep into the die, whereas later strikes show a larger, bolder P standing high and clear. Collectors meticulously compare mint mark size, strike depth, and positioning relative to the date. Differences so nuanced they require caliper measurements or specialized microscopes. Small P quarters in high grades often command a premium of 20 to 30% over their bold P counterparts. If you venture beyond the major varieties, you'll encounter off-center strikes and clipped planchets that epitomize mechanical mishaps. Off-centers in 1981 can range from barely noticeable shifts, just enough to nibble at the outer legend, to dramatic alignments where Washington's ponytail nearly disappears. These off-centers mirror each stage of production. Some occur when blank feeding mechanisms grab a misaligned planchet, while others happen if a clipped planchet slips through the shearing process. A quarter 3 to 4% off-center might trade for $15 in circulated condition. At 10 to 12% off, each uncirculated example can command $200 or more, scaling higher as the offset grows and the strike remains sharp. Beyond technical errors, intriguing auction records demonstrate just how coveted certain 1981 pieces have become. In a 2022 Heritage Auction sale, a PCGS MS-67 Plus double die obverse Philadelphia quarter hammered for $2,350, a striking result given its humble face value. The same sale featured a Denver Mint broadstrike quarter in MS-65 that soared to $1,150, buoyed by a dramatic die spread that flung Washington's bust almost to the rim. Even more modest discoveries can surprise. In 2019, an eBay seller listed a small P MS-66 for $499. By the time bidding closed, bids raced past $1,000 as specialists recognized its rarity. Economic context fuels interest too. In the early 1980s, metal surcharges and rising collector demand prompted a temporary surge in proof and mint state sales. As investors eyed precious metals, fewer quarters re-entered circulation, making high-grade circulation strikes increasingly scarce. Today, raw 1981 MS-67 quarters can fetch over $200, while registry sets push collectors to chase every die state, mint mark variety, and error. What began as pocket lint in your palm could actually be the key to a numismatic jackpot. Today, we're going deep on the 1970 quarter, peeling back its copper-nickel layers, tracing its journey from mint to market, and uncovering the quirks that can turn a 25-cent piece into a five-figure treasure. In 1965, rising silver prices forced the U.S. Mint to abandon the 90% silver composition that had defined quarters for generations. By 1970, the new clad coins, copper cores sandwiched between nickel, were the norm. The familiar portrait of George Washington, originally designed in 1932 by John Flanagan, remained on the obverse, while a heraldic eagle graced the reverse. Yet, even with design continuity, each year's striking carries its own story. Philadelphia's presses churned out roughly 136 million circulation strikes without a mint mark. Denver added a small d to about 417 million of its issues, and San Francisco quietly produced around 2.6 million proof coins, reserved for collectors and bearing that mirror-like sheen. Those millions suggest rarity would be scarce, but within that sea of metal, fascinating error varieties slipped through. Begin your inspection with the mint mark and planchet. Business strikes from Philadelphia are unmarked. Denver coins carry a subtle D just below Washington's ponytail. Proofs from San Francisco sport an S and glint like a tiny mirror. But it's the imperfections that thrill collectors. Off-center strikes shift the design toward one side, leaving a blank expanse on the opposite rim. Double-die obverse create ghostly shadows on letters or dates, as if two impressions overlapped. Clipped planchets reveal a crescent of missing metal, and in rare instances, entire rims fail to form. One legendary piece even shows a faint outline of an 1898 gold coin beneath the modern eagle, an overstrike so dramatic it melds 2 centuries in a single fluke. The difference between a face-value quarter and a numismatic superstar often boils down to error severity, grade, and backstory. A mild die crack or slight RPM, repunched mint mark, might push a coin's worth into the tens or low hundreds. But bold off-center strikes exceeding 50% of the design area or overstruck errors exposing ghost designs can shatter price expectations. Not long ago, an overstrike error, where a San Francisco proof quarter accidentally landed on a gold $5 planchet, crossed the auction block at nearly 6 figures. It had been hiding in a button collection, mistaken for costume jewelry, until a curious collector spotted the gold lettering beneath the eagle's wings. Standard uncirculated 1970 quarters in mint state 67 seldom fetch more than a couple $1,000s at specialist auctions. Yet errors in comparable grades can roar into six-figure territory. That gap speaks to collectors' hunger for true anomalies, coins that break the rules of manufacture. A Denver business strike graded MS67 Plus might sell for around $2,000. In contrast, a proof quarter with a dramatic clipped planchet error in PR68 condition might command tens of thousands, simply because it stands out from every other example. If you're assessing a 1970 quarter, note the hair details on Washington's neck, the sharpness of the denticles around the rim, and any unexpected gaps or doubling in the mint mark. A flawless mirror surface on a proof coin, free of the tiniest drag lines, indicates PR69 or even PR70, grades that can triple or quadruple value. Business strikes graded MS65 can be found for under $20, but MS67 examples often climb past $50. Extreme cases, MS68 with a bold RPM or proof mirrored fields can vault into the thousands. Condition and error type combine to form a value matrix that keeps dealers and auctioneers on their toes. Market demand plays a huge role. Collectors prize low-mintage anomalies, proofs accidentally released into circulation, or Denver coins with a stubborn die clash leaving raised lines across the field. Supply is finite. Once one of these rare pieces emerges, it often vanishes into a private collection. Auction houses relish the drama, pitting bidders against each other until the gavel falls on sums that dwarf the coin's face value by orders of magnitude. Stories behind the sales make the numbers come alive. One collector spotted an off-center 1970D quarter in a pocket change lot at a flea market. He paid 25 cents for the roll. Months later, after grading and authentication, it sold for over $22,000. Another found a proof S with a faint second S stamped beneath the primary mint mark, an RPM proof error. That coin changed hands for nearly $15,000 at a regional coin show. Tales like these fuel the thrill. You're not just buying metal, you're buying a narrative, a one-of-a-kind accident frozen in time. Even everyday examples hold interest. A well-worn quarter with light hairlines and smooth rims might still fetch a premium if it slips into an unexpectedly high grade, like VF35 or EF40. Subtle die cracks crossing Washington's cheek or faint doubling on Liberty can nudge a common date into the $5 to $10 range. Collectors use magnification tools and UV lights, searching for die polish lines or microscopic doubling that escape detection at the mint. Each tiny anomaly becomes a fingerprint, certifying the coin's uniqueness. Professional grading services, PCGS, NGC, ANAX, add credibility. A sticker from CAC, Certified Acceptance Corporation, on the holder signals that even among graded coins, this piece stands out. That green oval can boost prices by 10 to 20%. Collectors trust these endorsements. They know that behind each slab lies careful microscopic inspection, weight checks, and X-ray fluorescence analysis to verify metal composition. If you're holding a 1970 quarter and wondering whether to send it for grading, consider the potential upside. A raw coin might sell for $20 in a dealer's cabinet. Once graded MS67 with a CAC sticker, it could fetch $2,000 or more. Even a minor error in an MS66 holder can command several $100s. The grading fees are modest compared to the possible returns, especially when auction excitement drives bidding into the stratosphere. As you wrap up your examination, think about provenance. Coins with clear pedigrees, those traced from original mint sets or previously owned by prominent collectors, often outperform anonymous submissions. Auction catalogs highlight these lineages, weaving personal stories with technical details. A coin that once belonged to a renowned numismatist or featured in a museum exhibit carries intangible value that collectors prize. Before moving on, take a moment to appreciate the serendipity. That 1970 quarter began its life as everyday currency, destined to pay for coffees and laundromat tokens. Instead, a tiny misfeed in the press elevated it into a collectible marvel. Whether you found yours in circulation, inherited a roll from a relative, or dug it out of a jar on your dresser, this coin connects you to the hidden drama of mint machinery and the unpredictable quirks of mass production. Next, we'll turn our attention to the 1966 Washington quarter, a date that, at first glance, seems unremarkable but conceals its own lineup of die varieties, proof surprises, and low-mintage mysteries. We'll explore how that transitional year yielded errors every bit as thrilling as the 1970 and how you can spot the markers that turn a run-of-the-mill piece into a headline-making auction darling.